Thank you very much, Mrs. Georgieva. Well, that brings our discussion on the floods to a close. Let's now give you some information. The EPP group has made a request for a nomination to a parliamentary committee, and the list is in the minutes, and they will be considered to be adopted if there's no objection. Okay, let's move on to the next item. That's Anni Podimata's item on implementing enhanced cooperation in the area of financial transaction tax. Mrs. Podimata, you have the floor.
Oh, pardon, pardonnez-moi, je vous laisse le temps de vous installer.
Sorry, just I'll give you time to get seated.
Voilà, Madame Podimata.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. In Greek, ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, can I begin by thanking all of the rapporteurs, all of the shadow rapporteurs, that is, and can I thank Othmar KARAS, Ramon, TREMOSA, Philippe LAMBERTS, Marisa MATIAS for all of their work and their tremendous spirit of cooperation which has marked this whole exercise. We have been able to overcome difficulties in a good and comprehensive compromise. When I say good and comprehensive, I mean that we've been able to keep in the big elements of the tax, to cover all of the products, all of the associations, all of the companies and all of the markets, and also to make sure that when it comes to bonds and derivatives, we are able to get outside into the dark areas off of the actual stock exchanges, over the counter that is, and that is a very good basis so we don't have gaps in the coverage, so we haven't got the wrong kind of incentives, so that the institutions, the markets and the products can really work together and avoid tax avoidance and tax evasion. President, the Parliament has supported the Commission proposal for the FTT for under the heading of enhanced cooperation with 11 member states. I'm very glad that the Commission has looked at our old proposal for the criteria of issuance and the principle of residence, because that was a very important point. But we believe that should apply also to over-the-counter derivatives as well. That's going to, I think this is going to make us more effective in tax avoidance and tax evasion. And the principle of property for the legal issuance of the product, of the title. This is very important for us, and this was fundamental to the so-called, to the well-known, of course, Tobin tax. And despite the difference of opinion, despite the difficulties we've had, we have stayed true to the basic idea of the FTT. We've avoided any horizontal derogations, as they say, and we've allayed some of the concerns people had. Some, for example, the low coefficient for repos with the maturity date, the coefficient for funds up until the end of that period, a lower figure for the sovereign bonds as well. And this, I think, is necessary because of the crisis. We are simply responding to the crisis. We must avoid any distortions in this market, and we hope that this will serve as a precedent for taxation matters in the field of tax in general. The European Parliament has been beavering away now for 3.5 years. We've stayed true. We've had a consistent line in this area, because we believe that this is the best way in which the world of stocks and shares can pay their share of coping with the crisis. This now opens up the door, we believe, to own resources. And this will, I think, crack down on speculation and mean that the sector returns to its proper job of financing the real economy. Now, this is enhanced cooperation. This is 11 countries. They can now push ahead with the FTT. And I hope that very quickly we'll get a comprehensive agreement which will take us up into the next period, up until 24, so that we can see that, quite apart from any individual interest, no matter how powerful, There is a common European interest here, and that we are serving the common interest of the citizens who have borne such a high financial and economic price for the crisis. Thank you.
Commissioner Šemeta, you have the floor.
Mrs. President, honourable members, I wish first to thank you, and in particular for the work of your rapporteur, Mrs. Podimata, and shadow rapporteurs, for your continuous support in favour of the financial transaction tax. The goals of fair taxation, a cohesive single market and a more responsible banking sector are more relevant than ever, and we know that the FTT can contribute to all three. I welcome the positive views from the Econ Committee on our proposal for an FTT under enhanced cooperation. You tabled amendments on issues such as the introduction of spot currency transaction in the tax base or on ownership principle. You would not be surprised that the Commission cannot follow your proposals on these issues for legal reasons, which we have explained during the debate on our initial proposal. However, and I want to emphasize this point, the Commission welcomes the overall approach taken in your report and is ready to examine further many of the issues you raised. I would like to address here the main amendments which, in my view, represent interesting avenues to consider in the ongoing discussions with Member States. First, the Commission is ready to examine the suggestions made for an initial introduction of the tax with lower rates for products of specific market segments. I still believe that for reasons of tax neutrality, both government bonds and pension funds should remain in the scope of the directive. For those two categories of products, however, a reduced rate coupled with a rendezvous clause could constitute a suitable way forward, which should be further examined. The same is true for intra-group transfers. While understanding the spirit of your position, the Commission needs to examine the issue in more detail. Here again, an outright exemption potentially opens a very significant loophole in the tax base, which should be avoided. Second, the Commission is of the opinion that the treatment of some specific actors deserves further analysis and should be treated with caution. For market makers, the problem we face is the difficulty to define the activities which are useful for market liquidity, whereby avoiding a wide exemption that would expand to all proprietary trading. Such an exemption could open the door to implementation difficulties and have non-negligible effects on tax revenues. For non-financial companies, we heard your message and would rather be open to examine the possibility to avoid SMEs being unduly categorized as financial institutions. I am looking forward to hearing your views during our debate tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Madame Jensen.
Mrs. Jensen, on behalf of the Budgets Committee.
Tak for formand. Budgetudvalget har...
Thank you very much, Chairman. The Budget Committee has also looked at whether the FTT could be used as new own resources. Of course, it's difficult because not all countries are participating. It seems it will now be enhanced cooperation with participation of maybe 11 countries. And if we are to have the new financial transaction tax as new own resources, we'll have to invent a model. Because if those 11 countries contribute to the EU budget, it will be deducted from the contributions to the previous budget. And I thank Mrs. Podimata for including the points of view expressed by the Committee on Budgets here. It would have been easier with an FTT comprising all countries, but we all realize that that is not a realistic.
Thank you, Mrs. Jensen. And now for the groups, and Mr. Karas, first of all, for 1.5 minutes. Madam President, Rapporteur, Commissioner, the European Parliament has been an engine for years behind this idea of a global financial transaction tax. It was well intentioned, but it's still not well done. The proposal in front of us at the moment is a cash cow for the financial ministries of the member states. It's not going to be an own resources source for the EU, and it would distort competition. It runs counter to the financial market regulation, EMIR, Basel III, a strengthening of old age pensions, and from the point of view of the law, it's not adequate either. Legal order, it's not adequate. And so we in the Parliament have got together with the rapporteur and proposed some amendments which should bring about the following: highest rate rather than minimum tax rate. The aims remain a global aim, an FTT committee for all 28 member states. So we don't just need the 11 finance ministers, we need those who have to wind up banks. And then it has to be linked to a purpose. The revenue has to be purpose linked. All measures which would strengthen own resources and strengthen liquidity, all these measures, and reduce risk. These are they would be subject to exemptions. And when it comes to pensions provision, we want a 50% reduction on tax levying, and OTC transactions will be taxed at a higher rate than stock exchange transactions in order to ensure regularity. So I'm calling upon the Commission and the Finance Ministers in order to follow the report from the rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karas. Next speaker is Mr. Simon. 2 minutes. Thank you very much, President. We finally need to have the financial industry paying the cost of the crisis. Social Democrats have been fighting for this for years, that we should have a financial transaction tax. The European Parliament, after long negotiations under the wing of our colleague Anni PODIMATA, have arrived at a good conclusion, which is balanced both subjectively and objectively. And I think that she is to be credited for this excellent solution. The compromise that's been found show that there are no serious arguments for being substantially against the transaction of the financial markets. Quite to the contrary, at a time when every euro is needed to create new jobs and investment in growth, we finally need to move forward with the the transaction tax, to draw the right lessons from the crisis. The financial industry has done everything possible to try and prevent the European Parliament from moving forward with all sorts of spurious excuses. I'm glad that the European Parliament hasn't been fooled by them, and I hope that in the vote tomorrow we won't find this ending up like Swiss cheese. So, the Commission has rightly adapted its proposal. Those who are trying to lobby against the current compromise should realise that betting with pensions and sovereign bonds should not to be encouraged. I don't think there's any danger of a lack of liquidity, because there is less tax on certain kinds of transactions. The finance ministers need to show that they have the political will to have proper comprehensive taxation of the financial markets. They shouldn't be allowed to find any excuses. They need to ensure that this fair tax is applied next year, so we send out a clear signal that we want more justice. Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Mr. Tremosa is next.
Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank the rapporteur and all the colleagues for the very good job that they have done. Dear colleagues, as a Parliament, we only have a consultative role on the FTT tax. However, our vote is important to give a signal to the European citizens, in the sense that we ask for a European FTT that some Member States have been implementing on its own account. I am in favour of the FTT as a tool of better regulation of the financial markets, not to hurt or destroy them. This is why I have presented amendments to achieve various exceptions in order to keep the real economy as much unaffected as possible. In this respect, I particularly welcome the exemption for SMEs voted in Econ 2 weeks ago. European SMEs are today too dependent on bank financing, and in a credit crunch context in some member states, it is fundamental to make it easier for SMEs to access financial markets. It is also very important that government bonds only pay half the tax. The FTT should not increase the interest rate spread of countries and regions. Finally, it was reduced to a quarter the cost of the FTT for pension funds. However, I think that pensioners should not be taxed by the FTT, so this is why the Liberal Group asks tomorrow for a full exemption of pensions. In summary, I think that this Parliament can give a strong signal in favour of an FTT that taxes speculation and protects as much as possible the real economy. Moltes gràcies.
Gracias, colega.
Thank you very much, colleague. And now I recognise Philippe Lamberts on behalf of the Greens. He has 1.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. The FTT, the Tax on Financial Services, is going to penalise small depositors, small savers. It's going to penalise the holders of positions in pension funds. It's going to affect companies in the real economy. It's going to kill our economy, ladies and gentlemen. That's what people say. What we haven't heard is that the FTT is causes climate change, and that the FTT does not immediately cause the sky to fall in, the end of the world. The kind of language which the finance industry is telling us says those things. Big companies, big business, they're trying to improve their quarterly results, get back into a nice casino economy situation, and that's the kind of scaremongering which they have been peddling with their armies of lobbyists over recent times. The European Parliament has not listened to that alarmist language, which is bereft of any foundation. Thank you to Commissioner Šemeta for having brought forward a proposal which is simple, straightforward and effective. Thank you to colleagues across this House who support the idea of an FTT, because this work is still unfinished. This is unfinished business. And can I just say a word to everyone who sends us all this alarmist scaremongering? For once, come along with factual arguments, come back with statistics before you come up with this kind of ludicrous scaremongering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. You frightened me at the beginning, I have to say. And now Mr. Štěček has the floor on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists. 1 minute.
Dobrý den, dámy a pánové.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If our colleague Philippe Lamberts stopped in the middle of his speech, I would say that I have nothing to add and that I can stay sitting, because European conservatives, exactly for the same reasons Philippe mentioned, have kept rejecting the FTT. No tax has ever helped economic growth in the history. If you believe that the introduction of this tax will help the dying European economy, that's not true, then you are not right. If you think that financial institutions and banks should be penalized for what they have done, then I don't think it's a good idea. We do not support the wrong decisions in the past by bank management, but we believe that the main reason for current problems is a long-term debt, sovereign debt. And if the behavior of governments does not change, then no tax is going to help.
Gracias, colega.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute as well, on behalf of the European United Left, Mrs. Marisa Matias.
Thank you very much, President. I'd also like to start by congratulating the rapporteur on the work that she's put in. Thank you, Mrs. PODIMATA. Finally, after 5 years of crisis, we have the possibility to vote in favour of a financial transaction tax. So it would apply to all financial products and all markets, and of course, yes, there would be a lower rate on some projects, and that's something to be supported, but that's really the minimum after 5 years of crisis. I mean, you were taking money from the pensioners, the people who work. Speculators continue as if they're untouchable. It's adding insult to injury for Europe's citizens. They need to take their responsibility and we need to intervene. But beyond simply trying to attack the perks of the financial institutions, the whole issues of trying to strengthen the strong and weaken the weak, what we need to do is try to avoid this exemption for pension funds. What we need to do is protect pensions. What we can't allow is for pensioners' money to end up being played at the casino. This is what we must prevent. We can't allow this exemption because this is speculative activities. It's not beneficial activity for the economy. Thank you.
Now, on behalf of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy, for 2 minutes, Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if you'll permit me to gallop through the working day of the average Englishman. He wakes up and he turns on his taxed telly to get the news. He leaves his heavily taxed house, gets in his heavily taxed car, he fills it with heavily taxed diesel. He gets to work to earn an income which, after income tax, employer and employee national insurance, a third of his income has disappeared. A third. He drives home and stops on the high street for a few articles for the house. His purchases are taxed at 20%. He calls in for a pint, over 2/3 of the cost of which goes in tax. He dreams of a family holiday abroad, but he can't afford the airport tax. He longs for the day that he can retire, but the politicians won't let him go. We must steal his savings, mustn't we? The financial transaction tax. The poor sap doesn't even know we've nicked it. Of course, with the Commission, top salaries income tax-free, non-contributory pension schemes, it's difficult for you, isn't it, to imagine his distress? Because you're not in this game, are you? You're not in this game. You don't pay any of this. You don't pay any of this. On a more technical note, perhaps I can pick up, Mr. President, I draw the House's attention to my own lunatic committee's Amendment 39 to Article 4B. The withdrawal of legal title to untaxed transactions anywhere in the world. Sugar in the petrol tank, if you will. We're very much looking forward to the vote. We're watching to see which imbeciles commend it. I suspect it will be the same usual parliamentarian flat earthers.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. And now for 1 minute, Ms. ZILSTRA, on behalf of the non-attached members. Mr. and Mrs. ZILSTRA.
Thank you, President. President, the FTT is a bad idea. 1984, Sweden introduced one, and almost 30% of their financial business just upped stakes and went to the United Kingdom. Japan has also got a bit of a track record in this area. It really does impact on the economy. It increases the cost of investment, reduces the volume of trade, and reduces the amount of liquidity in the system. An FTT by means of enhanced cooperation is actually illegal. It's completely straightforward here, it's clear. If there are impacts on the internal market, no measure can come under enhanced cooperation, and the FTT does have effects on the internal market. The Commission knows that, the Parliament knows that as well, because the Parliament rejected my amendment, and I think that this is it's a bad idea, it's illegal to boot. And that really is Brussels in a nutshell.
And now we move on to the other speakers. And first of all, for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Werner Langen. Thank you very much, President. We've fought hard over this FTT for a long time, and the Commission has now made a proposal on the basis of enhanced cooperation, and I'm sure that's not ideal. This is also a Council regulation, so this is so part of the demands that we're quite rightly raising today have to be accepted by Council. And allow me to express some scepticism at this point, given the delegated acts which would concern the actual implementation. It will never be the case that the Council would allow Parliament to participate in the delegated acts, because the actual delegated acts at the moment would be falling within its own sphere of competence exclusively. So we have a compromise that's been found here, and I would like to thank Mrs. Podimata, in particular our coordinator, Mr. KARAS. Well, when they're asking for justified exemptions, low rates of taxation, transitional periods, they've introduced those. Now it's up to the Commission, but above all, it's up to the Council to actually implement Parliament's demands. And allow me not just to express scepticism, but also I have the reservations that have been raised are reservations I can share. The ideal solution is not a solution for 11 member states. Even a solution for the entire European Union wouldn't be ideal. The ideal solution would be that in the European Union, including this would have to include the UK as well, and also it would have to be global solution as well, including other big financial markets, and that's the problem that we can't solve. But nonetheless, I will, despite the reservations, I will give my support, because we have agreed on lots of exemptions. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Langen. Tiene dos.
Thank you, Mr. Langen. And now to 2 minutes, Mr. Domenici.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I also address my remarks to Council, and in particular to the 11 countries which have signed up for enhanced cooperation, because they have to decide what to do, and quickly. I think that we need a demarcation line to see how far a reasonable compromise goes, and where you get into exceedance, you get into pressure from the lobbyists and from the financial and banking world. Now, there has been agreement on enhanced cooperation. There has been some slippage up until 2014. I don't think that's good news because of the length in that period. Of course, we've got to go about this in a business-like way, but that's no reason, no need for us to get into the world of procrastination and delay. I think there's another way around of looking at this. The FTT is an opportunity to demonstrate the autonomy of political decision-taking with regard to the rules applying to the financial markets. Is an opportunity to break that link between sovereign debt and everything else. But the European Parliament, as Anni Podimata reminded us, has been sweet reason. None of us underestimate the undesired consequences, the side effects, but the excessive lobbying effort has been completely out of any proportion to that. We try to maintain some sense of balance. On the one hand, the volume of transactions, on the other hand, the financial markets, how they work. I don't think that I think that a reasonable compromise cannot keep out sovereign bonds completely on the secondary markets and derivatives. There has to be a degree of flexibility in the application of this, and not complete harmonisation of all the products. But then nor can you keep out entire segments of the market. So this is what we need to say to the enhanced cooperation countries. They need courage, they need to be reasonable, because at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer who's paying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Terho.
Kiitos, herra puhemies.
Thank you very much, President. Now, I am personally quite concerned about many aspects of this new project. First of all, can we really guarantee that in cases when some member states want to introduce an FTT, the tax doesn't cause any damage to those member states which aren't on board? Enhanced cooperation shouldn't be a model for other member states. It should remain voluntary for all member states to get on board. There shouldn't be any kind of financial incentives for introducing an FTT. Of course, one of the preconditions for such a tax is that it should be implemented on the worldwide. And I'm a realist. I don't think I don't think that there would be any particular problems if any member state wanted to get on board, but there would be some negative issues We already know the cases of some countries in the past, and we shouldn't cause any further damage than has already been done.
Gracias, señor Terho.
Thank you, Mr. Terho. And now for 1 minute as well, Ms. Nicole SINCLAIRE.
Mr. President, medical practitioners will know the acronym FTT well. It stands for failure to thrive. The idea of imposing new taxes on European business at a time of economic hardship and rising unemployment has been described as perverse and unacceptable by the former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson. But this is not an economic decision, is it? This is a political project. Even Christian Noyer, Governor of the Bank of France, stated recently that the FTT posed a very real risk to the economy, confirming the observation by Sir Mervyn King, the outgoing Governor of the Bank of England, that even amongst the 11 member states that agreed to press forward, there is not unqualified support. For a financial transaction tax to work, it would have to be global, as its proposer John Tobin stated. But do we think for 1 minute that the G20 would be prepared to follow the lead of the people who inflicted the Eurozone on the world? Tomorrow we will vote on whether to allow Latvia to buy the last ticket on the Titanic. This tax must never be allowed to set sail. It should be strangled at birth.
Thank you very much. And now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Nitras.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you, President. I fully realized that for some member states the introduction of this tax is a political priority. And that is why the Council has agreed also with the inclusion of other states not directly affected to continue the work on this FTT. I represent the countries who are excluded from this initiative, and I would like to express a certain sense of disconcertion. This new rules on solidar joint liability and the ways to prevent relocation and rules on tax evasion can very negatively affect the countries which are left outside of that scope. The FTT might become a kind of exterritorial charge. The fact that some member states do not introduce this tax means that financial institutions and tax administration of those countries will bear costs of it being introduced elsewhere. And now Article 332 of the Treaty on the Functioning of European Union says directly that any costs resulting from the enhanced cooperation apply only to the countries which acceded to the enhanced cooperation mechanism. So I think this calling for a special committee reviewing the way the rules are applied, including members of every country, not just those who take part in the mechanism. Now there's also the problem of own resources. Maybe we should talk about it more, and that will encourage other countries to join.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Mrs. KLEVA KEKUŠ.
Yes. Thank you very much. After many months of animated debates and negotiations, let me first of all thank cordially my colleague Anni PODIMATA, who was very successful in calming down the misgivings regarding the eventual effects on the European economy and growth by the FTT, of course. The new impetus enhancing economic growth and the lowering of risks for the future systemic crisis, as well as the transforming of the financial sectors and better financing of real economy, are all the goals that we are all striving to attain. And the basic message to be sent by the introduction of the FTT is that the taxpayers should no longer be borne bear the austerity measures on their own. The banking sector should take their share as well.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Pallone.
Grazie,
Thank you, President. Above all, I'd like to thank the rapporteur for the excellent work that she's done, and I thank all the shadow rapporteurs as well. This is tax that we really want, and it's a clear sign of our intention to regulate the financial sector. We want to prevent speculation, which is what caused the economic crisis in the first place. The fact that 11 member states have now committed themselves to apply this tax is an important step, but the tax will only be perfect once it's applied to all the member states and beyond the European Union as well. We need to avoid discretionality in the member states. It has to be applied uniformly. We don't want capital to be shifted outside a certain member state. We don't want to see a fragmentation of the internal market. So we've got to harmonise the rates at the European level. And it's important that the income from the FTT comes into the EU budget, and that can then be used in a more productive way. This revenue shouldn't just be added to national tax revenue. It should increase the expenditure capacity of the EU. I very much agree with what Mr. TREMOSA said. It's necessary, Commissioner, to ensure sanctions for speculative activity. What we want instead is banks that support real economic activity, and so the FTT. It has to be applied at the European level. It has to have a clear goal to significantly reduce speculative activity, which is risky and harmful to all EU citizens, harmful to industry. Where the FTT revenue should be used for productive purposes in the EU. Thank you very much, colleague. And now for 1 minute, Isabelle Thomas.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Well, allow me to start by congratulating our socialist colleague, Anni PODIMATA, on the work she's put in as rapporteur. Over a series of reports, she's been able to get a broad majority behind her positions, and this includes the financial transaction tax. And I think it really is up to the challenges that we face. In the past, the European Parliament has spoken out for the inclusion of transactions carried out by pension funds together with other financial institutions like banks, because they have played around with the real economy. So we've been working on this since the beginning of the crisis, and I think it's important that we send a clear message to the Council from now on. No financial transaction, whether it's speculative or not, will not get out of this socially fair tax, and it's an economically effective tax, and it's a self-regulating tax. Unfortunately, at this point, I've noticed that the Council conclusions from June did not mention the tax. It seems that the willpower in the Council has weakened recently. This is perhaps the result of the intense lobbying by the financial sector. I think it's a shame that we haven't taken the opportunity of the negotiations on the MFF to establish a calendar for implementing the tax. And we haven't associated the financial transaction tax with the debate on own resources. That's why I think that we should be maintaining the pressure on the Council through to the vote in October. This really is one of the red lines that we set in the resolution that we voted for on the 13th of March.
Thank you, colleague. And now for a minute and a half, Mrs. Astrid Lulling.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the third time we've been debating the FTT, the financial transaction tax, here in plenary, and I would have liked Parliament to show the way to Council by proposing improvements which were more substantive and substantial to an initiative which every day is running up against new roadblocks and obstacles, and yet things seem to be going the other way around. There are those who say that the FTT is a political and ideological project which has to be imposed come hell or high water. For the realists, the tax may never materialise, even if they're not brave enough to say that in public. And sometimes I wonder why it was not possible to deal with this fiscal subject, this tax subject, very delicate, with the same sang-froid as we evince when we talk about financial regulation, and in reality we've not made any forward progress. The text before the House today is going to end up penalising first and foremost, collective savings instruments, to wit, pension funds and investment funds. They're going to feel the pinch. Now, the intention was a very good one. It was to curb financial speculation, which is supposed to be allegedly so detrimental, but it's ended up punishing financial instruments whose job is to collect long-term savings. Now, why start with enhanced cooperation if it means everyone is going to be involved willy-nilly, whether they want to or not? That's the result. That's where we now are. And I must say that I'm going to be voting against a text which is going to have the opposite effects in terms of employment and jobs, other than what is suggested here. This is the opposite of what we should be doing. I do not really believe that the 11 member states which have signed up to enhanced cooperation are going to, I don't think they're going to do well. They're going to meet with adversity, I believe. But they just don't have the political courage to say that out loud. But perhaps their tongues will loosen after the German elections.
Thank you, Astrid. Well, Mr. Lambert wants to put a question to you. Would you accept a question? Then you'd have a minute more. Mr. Lamberts has a question for you, Mrs. Lulling. Mr. Lamberts would like to put a question to you, and if you answer, you'd have a little extra minute. Would you like to do that? Mr. Lamberts, you have the floor for a question.
It would be very quick, President. Mrs. Lulling, am I right in understanding that for you, if you look at the real situation and don't change things, you're a realist? If you want to change something, suddenly you're an ideologue. I just wonder why you're still in politics if that's the case. Mrs. Lulling, Mr. Lambert, if you'd been in politics as long as I have, and I don't think you're going to beat my record, given your ideology, then I would say to you that I change, but I don't change for the worse. We said with the FTT that we wanted to stop speculation, short-term speculation, and that's what we're now doing. But we are punishing investment and saving in the long term because the pension funds and the investment funds are not going to be able to take this. And you're going to see, well, Singapore will be laughing. They're licking their chops. They're only too happy to step in investment funds from over there. Quite simply, they know that if we slap an FTT on financial transactions, then there's going to be a great sucking noise, and there's going to be relocation on a huge scale. Now, you can be in favour, and there are many here who are adherents, but there are many who are in favour, knowing full well that it's never going to come to pass, and that's hypocritical. Now, you can't tell me that I'm ignorant because I'm against, and you'll see, and it will happen your country as well.
Thank you very much. That was fine like that. That was a blue card, but let's not waste any more time because we're very much behind, and it's up to the President to manage the blue cards. And now for 1 minute, Mrs. GÁLL-PELCZ.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for her very committed work. She certainly showed a lot of stamina in this report. It's not the first time that the European Parliament has been called upon to come to a position on the important issue of the financial transaction tax. But it's important that we set the right starting point. Of course, tax policy is in the competence of the member states, so from that point of view, we need to analyze the issues. Well, of course, I certainly agree that the financial sector needs to show solidarity. It needs to help out with crisis management. And to that extent, an FTT is a good thing. When it comes to pension funds, I think it is a good thing that we are introducing reduced rates because they are less likely to speculate. I can accept that approach, that it's a political priority for quite a number of member states. So, to that extent, it's a good thing. And also, we do want to attract other new states to come on board. It shouldn't be just 11 countries. I think that there should be representation on the expert group for all of those that have not been involved in the enhanced cooperation to date. Of course, we need to see how the Council deals with the issue, and only the future will show whether this tax performs a useful contribution to overcoming the crisis. Thank you very much, President.
Gracias, colega.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Markus Ferber, who will be the last speaker in our list of speakers. Thank you, President, dear colleagues. First of all, a big thank you to our rapporteur, who really has got down to work, and she's breathed life into the Commission proposal. I think it's now become something useful, fits in with practice. I'd like to say straight away, Mrs. Lulling, the electoral campaign doesn't just concern what's happening in Germany, but there is a broad consensus in the German Parliament and in many other parliaments that an FTT is something that should be introduced. And that will survive the 22nd of September, the German elections. It's because it's a question of making a contribution to this area which involves burdens for the taxpayer. Well, in the future, then the taxpayer will be able to manage their own risks, and where intervention is necessary, then the FTT will make a contribution to increasing tax revenue. We need to shape this in such a way that we don't make the real economy suffer too much. I'm pleased that the rapporteur was able to cooperate with the shadow rapporteurs in order to enter into good compromises and to shape this in such a way that it does fit in with practice. And I hope lots of member states will be able to apply this as soon as possible. The goal should be that the FTT should be available in all member states and not just in 11. Thank you very much.
Ferber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferber. So we've come to the end of the list of other speakers, and now we can move on to Catch the Eye. And you already know that I'm going to cut you off at the end of the 1 minute. I should be very strict. So first of all, I'll give the floor to Seán Kelly, my dear friend.
Mr. President, I just want to say I think this is a novel situation for the European Union, one that I'm excited about, even though my own country is not involved or in favour at this point in time. But number one, enhanced cooperation is something that's going to become more and more important within the European Union as we continue to grow. It was okay when we had maybe 6, 9, 12 member states. Now, as of yesterday, with 28, it's going to continue into the future. So enhanced cooperation is a way of getting around the unanimity factor. Secondly, having a financial transaction tax, and I compliment the countries that are willing to take it on, is going to be very exciting for everybody, particularly if it's successful and it doesn't lead to a flight of finance out of these particular countries. That then would encourage other countries to get involved, and that's what I would hope will happen in due course.
Gracias, Sean.
Thank you very much, Sean. And now Mr. Cofferati has the floor. Thank you, President, dear colleagues. Commissioner, we're lucky to have at our disposal a good proposal thanks to the excellent work by Mrs. Podimata. And now it's a question of acting quickly, because the topic we're discussing is important in relation to the time frame as well. The proposals are reasonable ones, the exemptions are contained and restricted in number, so we've got to act quickly in order to achieve what we've been talking about, actions relating to the enhanced cooperation. That's enough. Stop saying if not everyone's on board we can't do it. Stop saying that. It's important to start. We need to have the right restricted rules. We can't expect we should wait for everyone to be on board before we take the first step. And given the political framework the EU is living through at the moment, it's important to send out a very clear signal saying that we're going to fight against speculation, and we're going to pinpoint. There's no microphone left.
Vamos a apoyar este informe.
We're going to support this report because having a tax on the financial transactions is a step in the right direction. But it's a pity that we think we're going to get an extra 50 billion. But I don't think we're going to be able to stop speculation just with this raising this 50 billion. I mean, okay, we'll try to make the Commission more independent of the member states. And I hope other member states will join, because this measure will become more effective if it's global. It's a pity that the veto of certain member states to a right proposal, a progressive proposal, is now forcing us to start off with an enhanced cooperation mechanism, and we need to work to protect pensions, SMEs and the real economy. And I hope the anti-fraud measures will show that what it might have seemed a utopia for 40 years now can become a genuine reality. Thank you very much, Isaskun. And now Mr. João Ferreira.
Thank you very much, President. Well, for quite a long time now we've been fighting for a financial transaction tax, a tax which would work together with other measures to help combat financial speculation and would allow resources to be redirected from financial speculation into combating poverty and social issues. So, if we had a proposal for a proper FTT, then this would be a step forward. But if you look at the proposal on the table, this might not end up with very much at the end of the day. Okay, if you look at we've got enhanced cooperation with a number of countries. We've got exemptions on some products. We've got including the pension funds we've heard so often. We've had minimum rates have been turned into maximum rates. There are other indispensable measures that need to be taken, such as getting rid of tax havens. These aren't really mentioned. We have to remember that the public opinion is very much against the financial sector. The microphone was cut off.
And now Mr. Claudio Morganti has the floor.
Thank you, President. The purpose of the FTT was to hit the financial sector because they were the culprits for the financial crisis. And I think that that is no doubt the case. But I wonder, is this going to be to do the job? Is it going to be effective? It should be a global thing. It should be pitched at the global level. And the EU itself is a house divided. I'm not a great defender of the City of London, but I think that with this proposal, this is going to be another gift to the Brits for their financial markets and internationally as well. And there are clearly too many hidden pitfalls. A clear separation between commercial banks and investment banks, that's the right thing to do. But they should be able to operate in Europe as well, and this is going to break their back before they start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. George Kutas has the floor.
Domnule președinte, taxa pe tranzacțiile financiare.
President, the FTT could become a factor which will discourage high-risk activity and discourage speculation, and it represents for the financial sector a fair way of making a contribution to the whole process of restructuring our economies. And this tax will give rise to significant revenue. 57 billion euros is the estimate for the 27 member states, and if it's just enhanced cooperation between the 11 member states, then that would be just a 38 billion euro revenue. The member states that have decided to cooperate should be encouraged, and I regret that the other member states have not chosen to join this mechanism, to come on board. I'm also thinking about the exemptions for certain categories. I don't know whether that's a good idea, because I think selective implementation could turn out to be negative for the economy. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kutas. And the last speaker under Catch the Eye is Mrs. Flasikova Beňová.
Thank you for the floor, President. The common system of the financial transaction fact is a tool to fight against crisis and against speculations. If this tax is applied to all the transactions among the institutions, out of which at least one has its headquarters in the EU, that would be a good thing. It is related to VAT, and we think all the systems should be set up in a fairer way. If the services are not burdened with the VAT, there can be savings up to 18 million euro. 4.6 billion euro are spent without the system, and we could get 57 billion euro if we introduce the system, and this income will be divided between the EU and the member states. This tool can discourage people from speculative acts, and we can also prevent future crises. Thank you very much.
Well, we've come to the end of the Catch the Eye procedure. And now I'm going to give the floor to Commissioner Šemeta, and he's going to give his response on behalf of the Commission to the debate. And also I'd like to congratulate you because your country has the presidency starting today. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, honorable members. I want to thank you for the views you expressed during the debate. Your support for an EU FTT is an important signal for the Member States. As you may know, discussions in the Council continue. Today, the reading of the Commission proposal is being finalized by the relevant Council working group. The Commission has invited the Lithuanian Presidency to continue the discussion in the Council in order to come to the adoption of the compromise text as soon as possible. It is time for the Member States to converge on the FTT to be implemented while also protecting the spirit and purpose of this tax. I call for a constructive dialogue with all Member States, participating and non-participating, to rapidly come to viable solutions. But evidently, it is now for the 11 participating Member States to look for definitive solutions. With this report, the European Parliament presents some good ideas to feed into these discussions. It leads to better balanced solutions and facilitates future adoption. For its part, the Commission will continue to support negotiations in every way possible to facilitate a swift and ambitious compromise on the FTT. Again, I wish to thank you for your broad support in moving forward with this initiative. Thank you.
Comisario, vamos a cerrar el punto con la intervención.
And now we'll hear again from the rapporteur, Mrs. Anni PODIMATA. Anna, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Σας ευχαριστώ όλους, κύριε.
And thanks to all colleagues for their comments. I want to just make 3 points in response. First of all, everyone is looking at the ultimate objective, which is to provide this FTT in the EU in advance of it being extrapolated really to worldwide at a global level. And I think that an effective FTT I think the best way to get that is to get away from horizontal derogations and also to crack down on avoidance and evasion of tax. This does not endanger or imperil people's pensions. On the contrary, I think that it will bring relief to taxpayers because it will mean that this whole area is brought under control. This will be to their benefit. And also it's going to crack down on dangerous speculation on behalf of the funds, where their managers have to leverage their assets in order to have the money to put into this kind of speculative area. There are those who are afraid of the consequences and are concerned about the scope of this and what's left out. Is it going to affect those who it's implemented on? Is it going to hit those who are not going to implement it? I think that that is the question we've got to look at. And last but not least, in English.
Financial transaction tax is set that it will have on the real economy. And let me read you something which was written in 1936. It is usually agreed that casinos should, in the public interest, be inaccessible and expensive. And perhaps the same is true of stock exchanges, that we didn't have at the time the over-the-counter. The introduction of a financial transaction tax on all transactions might prove the most serviceable reform available with a view to mitigating the predominance of speculation over enterprise. John Maynard Keynes, Interest and Money, 1936. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Anni. And now we come to the end of that debate, and the vote will take place tomorrow at midday. And now we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the report from Mr. Giegold on laws, regulations and administrative provisions relating to undertakings for collective investment in transferable securities. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Giegold, who has 4 minutes to introduce this topic. You have the floor.
Ja, verehrter Herr Präsident.
Mr. President, dear Commissioner, this report is down for vote tomorrow, and today is the debate. This is the 5th revision of the directive on UCITS, OGAF in German. And the Commission, with the existing directive, has suggested improvements to enhance protection for consumers in the field of deposit banks, rules for remuneration for the managers of investment funds, and also more harmonised sanctions penalties between different member states in this area. Now, these improvements are urgently needed. In deposit banks, we've seen with the Madoff scandal what happened. Depositors lost large amounts of money, and the Commission proposal therefore learns the lessons from Madoff. And it's gratifying to see that over group lines in the Parliament, in the committee, now in plenary, we have supported the Commission approach. And I'd like to thank the shadows for the different groups for their encouragement and support. Because looking at the amendments, that was not always going to be straightforward. There was intensive lobbying. Those from the central issuing banks, they didn't want the rules to be so strict. And we have changed this in the best interest of investor protection. That's only right. Now, there are 2 contentious areas in plenary where there was a big majority in Econ in the committee. First of all, the suggestion that the ceilings for bonuses in the banks simply be replicated and or extended, in fact, to the investment funds UCITS. This, I think, is sensible. It's joined up. It's consistent, because excesses in the paying bonuses, it's not just the banks in the financial sector. There's a culture of risk which is completely unknown in the rest of the economy. Many people would be happy if they only got 1 bonus every month in their paycheck. And it's amazing what happens in certain member states where for 24 months, but 24 times month is not enough. And we've got to get something more sensible, which is more reasonable, more saying that bonuses cannot be above the fixed income, the actual salary. And here, Commission, a more comprehensive set of proposals would be very good. The House of Commons has produced new proposals. They're rather different, perhaps, but this dreadful culture of excessive bonuses is not just confined to one sector. It should be approached in its different sectors where it applies. Therefore, the rules in banking, already decided, cut and dried. Parliament very proud to have got them through. They should now be extended to another major, big market. The second point, which is contentious, was remunerations which depended on the performance. Now, when it comes to